Will the P2 break away by the end of the decade? Let's talk college football 2030.
College football is going strong, and we're back on the big mountain to break it down for you.
Hey, welcome back to the mountain. I am JY, and this is my good friend Steve. Steve, here we sit for our third episode in the series College Football 2030. We did our first episode on the NCAA. We did our second episode on the college football playoff. That one was a lot of fun.
Yep.
And that was right when it was hot and heavy about college football playoff. I got to say, I think it's holding up pretty good right now. But, it's only 2024.
Yeah.
So the third one here is talking about the P2 and a potential breakaway. That, again, was hot and heavy as we were talking college football playoffs. Mm-hmm. It's going to die down, I think, here a little bit as there's going to be a contract. I don't think it'll die down for too long. It seems to be one of the top topics. I think overall you have three topics you want to go over here with this. Yep. So I'm going to let you drive the ship here, Steve. What do we got?
Yeah, so and it's important to kind of recap this project that we're doing. It's not necessarily about what's happening right now in the news, the most recent news items. It's more about where we see college football at the end of the decade.
Yep. College
football 2030. So one of the big topics, we've gotten through a couple of other ones like you mentioned, and one of the big topics that always comes up is, will the Power 2 break away? Okay. So first of all, before we can really even get into that, what does that really mean, breakaway? What could it look like? What are potential Power 2 breakaways? How could they work and what would they look like? So first of all, there's been a lot of speculation, and I've heard speculation through my contacts at Penn State and some other places that, basically they're being told to prepare for a potential where the Big Ten and the SEC go their own way, have their own rules, where they could leave the NCAA completely. Okay, so that is one potential scenario where basically the Power 2, they're no longer part of the NCAA. They come up with their own rules, whether it's each conference does that or they do together in some way. So that's one potential possibility.
Right.
So another breakaway that kind of makes probably more sense to some people would be if football would break away, okay? Where, and maybe basketball because they're also a revenue sport. Yeah. So you could have a scenario where, let's say, college football and men's and women's basketball break away from the NCAA because they're not really a nonprofit. They're making huge amounts of money for these schools. Yeah. Could they break away and do their own thing and become more of a business and let those Olympic sports stay with the universities, with a conference or under the NCAA purview, who the NCAA actually does, for all the criticism we give them and everybody else gives them, right, they do a fantastic job of running these championships for Olympic sports and giving, swimmers, wrestlers, track athletes, all these other sports that aren't revenue sports, giving them kind of a model, a platform, an opportunity to play their sports in college, get a scholarship, and then compete for national championships.
Right.
So that's another, potential if we say the Power 2 breaking away. Could just be in football or maybe football and basketball, the revenue sports.
Right.
The other possibility that's really thrown out there is a genuine super league where these two combine.
Yeah. They
create a league and they're an entity kind of like an NFL, like a competitor, or a smaller version of the NFL.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people really seem to think that will happen. I have my doubts for certain reasons, but it's something definitely to explore and to talk about. I just don't see college being a competitor for the NFL. But, there is a lot of momentum and a lot of people see them as coming together as a super league. And these movements, there's a lot of comparison of the movements of the Big Ten and the SEC to back in the day of the old NFL and AFL, which merged to create what we now know as the NFL, which is an amazing league, amazing product.
Yep.
So before we move on to the next topic, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I just want to comment. I saw an article recently that I believe Casey Wasserman made a quote here, and he's an entertainment exec and sports agency, business guy than he is a college football guy. But his quote was, "If you're not in the Big Ten or the SEC, you will become a development system for them."
Yeah.
Definitely sounds like a business guy saying that. I understand why someone would say that, and it gets a little bit more, I think, to your super league. Mm-hmm. Really, a super league / call it a kind kind of that minor league for the NFL. I mean, to me, that's what that would become, that minor NFL league. And I know, again, we've talked about this before, kind of that old head mentality. Yeah. It's hard to get around that or away from that, especially when we're talking about business and minor league type of stuff. I know where we're headed from the employment side of things. We've done a lot on NIL and all that kind of stuff. I get all of that. But to me, taking that extra step, as you said, to this, what I'm going to call, maybe you can disagree, but the Super League / minor NFL league is for me, it's a bit of a step too far at this point. It doesn't mean we won't get there eventually, but that just seems to be really far out into the future for me. But could be wrong.
I can understand that sentiment, and I will just say, you and I following, we follow the Big Ten, we follow the Mountain West, we follow the Pac. We've started to kind of see the precursors of that.
Oh yeah,
with both athletes, athletic directors moving from those smaller schools into one of the P2 with the more revenues. But how far is that going to go?
Well, that's the question.
That's the thing. Yeah. How far will it go? 50 years from now, that might be completely different than when we get to the end of this decade as well.
Yeah.
How much change happens by 2030?
Exactly.
Okay, so the second topic that I really wanted to bring up, because I think this is the most important part of P2 and why they may break away, is the brand value. Okay, they're basically, the SEC and the Big Ten are consolidating all of the biggest brands.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of different ways you can measure brand value. There's all kinds of different metrics. There's numbers, there's marketing, all this stuff. But to me, it really comes down to TV. That's what's driving the revenue. Television contracts are driving the revenue. Well, what's driving the value of these television contracts? It's the viewers, the viewership. So I want to start this out. We're going to put it up. There's a awesome chart that was done by Tony Altomar. So his handle on X and Twitter is TJ Altomar, at TJ Altomar. So we have this chart we're going to put up here, and he really breaks down the brand values, specifically focusing on large public universities, the flagship universities, and the land grant universities versus versus private universities or other public schools that are not a big flagship or a land grant. So to me, this is the driver. You can see where the Big Ten has gone, where the SEC has gone, picking up. So if you look through these, what jumps out at me right away, the large public universities: Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, Georgia, Penn State, LSU, Oklahoma, Texas, and Florida. All of those between 2016 and 2013, they had a net of over 200 million viewers on TV using the Nielsen ratings.
Sure.
And every single one of those schools that we just mentioned is in one of the P2, or will be in one of the P2 very soon, as we start this upcoming season. So they've already been grabbed up. So what are the next potential targets as they continue to suck up these big brands? Well, you have Clemson is the next one, which is a large public land grant university. Over that same period of time, it had 200 million viewers. Florida State, now he puts this on the non-flagship, the other public schools. I've told you before, and I get it. University of Florida is the flagship University of Florida. I'm not contesting that whatsoever. But what I will say is, for a state as large as the state of Florida, you can basically look at Florida State as also being a flagship university. And they're next on the list with 190 million viewers. So to me, it's obvious those two jump out. And and I'm sure that it's not a coincidence. Those are the two schools right now that we're covering. They're trying to get out of the ACC, and they're suing because they see their value.
Absolutely.
And the SEC sees their value, the Big Ten sees their value, and they know their value, and they're trying to get the heck out of the ACC. So,
and if I may just opine on
it.
that a little bit, I'm going to go off a little bit of a sidetrack. But if anybody wants to believe at this point that either of those schools have not heard from one or both, probably both,
through some back channel
of the P2, they're kidding themselves.
I agree.
I mean, it doesn't mean they're gonna go. I mean, although I will say I think what they're doing in the courts right now means, well, I shouldn't say. FSU is going to go.
Yes, right.
I'm 99% sure Clemson is going. I think you're 100% sure.
Yeah.
Clemson is going to go.
Yep.
But I still think there are these people that have somewhat of their heads in the sand and they're like, oh, they're not going to No. And there's things happening behind the scenes. But hey, I don't want to go off on that too much. But it goes right into what we're seeing.
And here's the thing. And both desperately want to get out of the ACC, but I agree with you 100%. And I know for certain that within the Big Ten, there have been talks, whether it's back channel, maybe not official invites, obviously.
Yeah.
But the Florida State people know they've got a landing spot in the Big Ten. Right. I don't know about Clemson. I think we had some comments and some viewers take it to mean that I didn't think that that Clemson would ever go to the Big Ten. It's just not. I haven't heard them, but I am just going to assume, and I think you'd have to be naive not to, that they've gotten some kind of indication from one of the Power Two that they will likely have a landing spot.
There's interest,
or they wouldn't go.
100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those are the two right away, and those are the two that jump out at me. I mean, you could look at this chart. They jump off the paper right away. They are these two schools are not like the others who they're joined with.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of go down a little further and talk about some other potential targets that we've talked about and some that we haven't talked about that also have a lot of media value.
Okay.
So the next two surprised me quite a bit. West Virginia and Colorado. Okay. So Colorado was kind of that. They're both either right at 100 million or just over 100 million viewers on, which is, I mean, that's a good solid number for both of those schools, considering they're not necessarily huge schools, huge fan bases, huge population bases, but you did see Colorado was kind of that linchpin of breaking apart or the keystone of the pack falling apart.
Yes.
Them moving to the Big 12. There was speculation at one point that maybe the Big 10 would be interested, and it looked like that just never came about. But for them, they made that move. They felt like going from the pack to the Big 12 was a better. They were going to get better value for that, and it would be a better representation of their value. West Virginia, that's just, again, that one surprised me. So we'll see how that goes. I've never had them come up on the radar, but they do. They have 100 million viewers, which is interesting. The next one out of the poll.
If I can say on West Virginia, there ain't nothing there.
No, there's not.
I mean, Appalachia, city, country, area, there's nothing there except for West Virginia.
Right.
I mean, I don't live there. I have not ever lived there.
Right.
I know people that have gone to school there,
and
it's not too far from us here. But I'll tell you what, they are serious.
They're serious
legit.
about football, yes.
I mean, the West Virginia folk do not mess around. So am I surprised they're where they're at? Yeah, I would say they are. But when I think about it, they're legit.
Yeah.
That's a legit, and there's nothing else there, right? You don't have many other options.
There's no pro teams to compete with.
What else are they doing there? They're making moonshine.
And I'm going to say some of those numbers probably come. They have a really healthy rivalry with Pitt.
Yes.
And some of those the games they played over the last 10 years.
Pitt.
Yeah.
All that.
Pitt, all that, yeah. They call it, I think, the backyard brawl, I think, is that.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So anyways, they kind of surprised me. I don't see them as a contender, but hey, that number they put up there, you never know. The next school I want to get to is a school we've talked about a lot. UNC, University of North Carolina. They're right behind West Virginia and Colorado. They have about 70 million viewers, and we've talked about their brand isn't just football. They're a unique school. There's not a lot of schools like them. So they're not bad as far as the football is concerned, but a lot of their brand value comes from basketball, comes from the Michael Jordan brand, the powder blue unis, all that kind of stuff. So
and we were corrected and said we would always call it powder blue.
Okay, what do they?
But it's what they call it NC blue. Or
North Carolina blue. I get
Tar Heel blue.
Tar Heel blue. Okay, Tar Heel blue.
Something like that.
Yes,
powder blue is fine for me.
They're definitely they're right there. As far as the football viewers, kind of a little bit behind, but they have that extra brand value.
Yeah.
So, and we've talked about the North Carolina market and how it's growing and expanding, and Big Ten alums are moving down there. So, I wanted to compare those. So, obviously, the land grant universities and the public flagship universities, we've identified Clemson and Florida State, top two in viewers, and there's no coincidence as to why those are the schools that are fighting to get out of the ACC. So, I wanted to compare it to some privates. Now, first of all, Notre Dame, I said basically Notre Dame is the number one target of the Big Ten. They're just, the Big Ten knows they're not going to get them right now.
Yeah.
I think there was a couple people that pushed back on that, said, well, Florida State's obviously, well, what does it really matter if you're the number one or the number two target? They're both right up there. But Notre Dame, 280 million viewers. So almost 100 million more than Florida State.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, their brand value, and they're another school where not just their viewers, they have that brand. They're the major Catholic school in the country. They have a national fan base. So 280 million viewers. And then there's a huge drop off. And these are schools, and I should have said this at the beginning, these are schools that are not currently in the P2.
Right.
So a private school, the next one, TCU, 115 million viewers. So there's been a lot of talk about the P2 maybe wanting Big Ten, maybe wanting to get into Texas.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think that TCU fits what the Big Ten is looking for. They usually want public schools, land grant universities,
Right.
or flagship public schools. This is a private school, but 115 million viewers. There's some value there. So if there was one of the major conferences that wanted to increase their footprint in Texas, that could be a big. And then the next thing, Miami, again, another school we've talked about, private school, 110 million viewers. So they're ahead of West Virginia and Colorado. And I think we've had Miami down on the list for the Big Ten, but still ahead of these other schools of West Virginia, Colorado, these other schools. So it makes sense. But you can kind of see the comparison with privates. If you don't have Notre Dame there, which is they're kind of a very unique situation,
right.
There's just not a lot of value. You have I can only find 2 private universities that were over 100 million viewers. So, and again, we've talked about the Big Ten. We've talked about what they're looking for, and some of these schools don't necessarily match that. However, I do think it's clear both of these schools, as they've looked to add, they want to add these large schools. A lot of people are watching, a big fan base, a big alumni base, and so these are the schools that jumped out at me. Clemson and Florida State, obviously. North Carolina, I think, is a possibility. They would add value to one of the power. And then if they looked at the privates, obviously Notre Dame is there. Once Notre Dame, when they decide they want to join a conference, they're going to have an open invitation. But a couple to keep an eye on, TCU and Miami. I think they're just, and not only, they're in those important states of Texas and Florida. So networks could be interested in those. So I really wanted to talk, I think that is the major reason for the consolidation of the Pac-2 or the Power 2. And if they wanted to slip to basically break away, it would be because they want to collect the most valuable properties, kind of like IPs, bring them together and basically have their own thing where they control all the top 25, the top 30, the top 50, top 60, whatever brands and brand value to themselves. Any comments on that?
Well, I think TCU stuck out there. That's not a school we've really talked about. We've done all kinds of different episodes on all kinds of different things, and TCU I don't think's ever come up in anything that we've said. So that one probably stuck out the most to me. I get it. That's a private. So, but it's also Texas.
Yes.
And I think to your point, I think the Big Ten, if Texas is of interest to them, they're going to be pretty limited in terms of what fits most. How do you say that? Usually they're not their demographics, but you say
their profile, their desired profile. Usually large public land grants.
They don't have a lot there. I mean, obviously Texas is SEC, highly unlikely they're going to, So that to me, that's the most interesting thing that you probably brought up. Well, you brought up a lot of good stuff, but that one stuck out.
I agree with you, and Miami too. We talked about Miami getting AAU status, how that could be a game changer for them. I still think they're pretty far down the list. It's obvious that Florida State and Clemson are the 2 most valuable, along with Notre Dame. But if you're trying to even out conferences and kind of bring, kind of close them up and finish them off, those are some schools that may end up getting a peak just because of their brand value.
Well, and I think, and maybe this is going to be the third topic that you get to, but how big do they actually want to get, right? So is it 2 more? Is it 10 more? I don't.
So that we're going to talk about our next episode next month will be I'm going to give my predictions next month. I'm going to build out what I think the Power 2 will look like in 2030, and I'll let you, if you decide you want to do it.
I definitely want to do it, but you're going to be the guy with the knowledge, and I'm going to do it just for fun.
Yeah. So this week it's more about the why. Why would they want to do it?
Gotcha.
They want to accumulate more brand value. And then my third topic of why they may want to do it is rules. Okay.
Yes, okay.
I'm not really going to get in depth on all the lawsuits because there's 5 or 6 major lawsuits, and I think there was another one that was just filed for back money from the result of another lawsuit. But there's definitely reasons why the Power 2 may want to go and have their own rules. Not just the lawsuits, but because those are of the past, but to fight, to basically have more control over their own destiny going forward, and maybe head off future lawsuits. So I'm going to go through that. First, I want to talk about the history of that. So in 2014, the NCAA gave what was then the Power Five autonomy, basically, to give more benefits than other schools, other programs were allowed to do. And they created what's been known as the Autonomous Five. You won't find that in NCAA their terms anywhere on their website or whatever, but that's basically what they created, was the Autonomous Five. And I've noticed the PAC, they still hold on to that. They still say we're one of the Autonomous Five. Yep. So
they lost their P5 status. Apparently they're hanging on to
A5. Yes. So and honestly, it's huge for them. I mean, that for all of the schools, this was changed 60 years of precedent of everybody being equal. From the smallest school to the biggest school had to play by the same rules. The NCAA set that precedent because, frankly, we could have had a Power 5 breakaway 10 years ago.
Sure.
But instead, the NCAA gave them their autonomy, and they opened the door. They set the precedent for, what we may see going forward. Yeah. So, why, they already got their autonomy. Why would they want to continue to go forward? Well, they might want more autonomy. They might want more control over their own destiny. The Big Ten and the SEC have the largest media contracts. They may want to do some revenue sharing, whereas some of the other conferences, they're using that money to just barely kind of survive and hold on and keep their programs going. The Big Ten and the SEC have money coming out their ears with these contracts, and they may want to share that with some of their players, which right now is banned by the NCAA.
Right.
Scholarship limits, that's another huge thing. We've talked about this in the past. The Big Ten, I've heard before, the previous commissioner, Kevin Warren, was exploring this. Right now, and I think the rule came in maybe in the early 90s, they've been at 85 scholarships. They used to be, I think, 100 or 110 scholarships. Everybody agreed to go down to 85 scholarships. And so, in some ways that can be a little crazy. For some schools, if they have all this extra money, they can only offer the same amount of scholarships. I'm going to give the comparison for a few of these things. Ohio State University to Ohio University.
Yeah, okay.
One school making, bringing in $100 million in revenue per year. The other school bringing in probably about $20 to $25 million in revenue per year.
Yep.
But they can both are only allowed to pay for 85 scholarships a year. Does that make a lot of sense? I guess it does in that old framework of the NCAA structure that they created where they wanted everybody to be equal. But really, did that make everybody equal? I don't think so. And so some of these schools might want to go to have no scholarship limits whatsoever, or take it back to 100 or 110, whatever. So that's something they may want to do. And honestly, that could help them with these lawsuits, where they could say, we're using all of our revenue and we're putting that back and we're offering scholarships. But if they're only offering 85 because of the rules and they have all this extra revenue, it's harder to kind of play that as a defense for some of these lawsuits. Benefits. What if Ohio, again, I'm just using this as a comparison, Ohio State and Ohio University. What if Ohio State says we want every single person, if you're a member of a new law firm, you may get a lease on a vehicle, or an accounting firm or whatever, you may get a lease on a vehicle. Well, we want to give every one of our student athletes, they're playing this, they're bringing all this revenue, we want to give them a $3,000 per year lease to lease a vehicle, then go get out a nice car or whatever. Well, they can't currently do that under NCAA rules. Maybe they want to offer benefits like that and come up with their own unique benefits. Ohio State may come up with some things. Notre Dame may come up with something else. Florida, Texas, they may want to come up with their own unique benefits, and they can't do that right now. Recruiting rules. Again, Ohio State University with an athletic budget and revenue, which is probably about 5 times of Ohio University.
Yeah.
But they have to have the same limits on the number of staff, on the number of visits, on how many recruits can visit and what they can do, what kind of benefits they can provide, the amount of coaches who can go on visits and travel and all of that stuff. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense to the Power 2 that they have to play by the same rules as these very small schools that are bringing in a small amount of revenue. So those are some rule things. And again, I think that comparison of the Ohio State to the Ohio University, it's just something, it kind of helps put it into perspective of, you have this major difference in revenue and what they're capable of doing. But for whatever reason, under NCAA rules, they have to, they're capable, their capabilities are, there's a large difference. They have to be the same on what they offer. So that's another reason why I think the P2 could very well break away. They have more money, they want to do more things, and they don't want to be constrained to the same rules that their poor neighbors, have to fall under.
Yeah.
So rules. That's kind of my take on that.
Okay.
Do you have any responses?
So, I got some. I want to play a little bit of this and that, or a yin and yang. So the first thing I'm going to say is, and we've heard this. I think we heard this from your good buddy President Schultz. Actually, I believe that's where it came from, not too long ago. But when they were talking about the NCAA and the issues with it and things going on, and we all know that. I'm not going to do that on this episode. But what makes more sense? And I don't know what. I'm going to go over 4 or 5 different things. I don't know what the right answer is here, but this is more. Let's put our P2 mindset in.
Yes.
Right, and what makes more sense for them? So here for the NCAA, does it make more sense to start over, start from scratch, or try and reform what you already have? And you've heard a little bit of that from, I think it was Schultz, if I remember correctly, saying, hey, why are we starting over? Let's work with what we have. It still has a solid base overall, and we got to reform what we need to reform. So that's kind of my yin and yang. Is it a start over type of thing, or is it, can we get a reform? And maybe it's let's try to reform, but we're only going to go with that for so long until, we're out of here, right? So, again, I don't know what's right or wrong there, but things to think about. The other one I will say is you talked early on, you talked about rules here later on, but you also talked about rules early on, and more control, potentially more risk.
Yeah.
Right? So the risk right now, if it's with the NCAA, I don't know what a P2, call it a junior league or a minor league or super league or whatever how you want to call it. But if you create it on your own, less universities and potentially more risk at those universities than having an NCAA type of institution. So again, not a right or a wrong, just kind of throwing that out there. The next thing I would just say is, scholarships. You mentioned scholarships. And in the past, I would be like, that makes a lot of sense. But we all know what's happening now with NIL.
Yeah.
And, where that's going to continue to go with NIL.
Yeah.
And I don't know we don't know exactly where that's going to go. We think it's going to get broken open to the schools as well here, eventually. And so does that actually then diminish the need for scholarships and the number of, because they have these huge NIL, whether it's the collectives or the universities that potentially can do it. So, I just want to kind of play that off of each other, right? So, I don't know. Again, that's reforming the NCAA or creating your own. I don't know.
And if I could just talk about that one part, and then you continue. So I do know what you're talking about is already happening. So NIL. There are schools in the Big Ten who they reach their 85 scholarship limit. And they got 3 or 4 more players that they want to sign.
Okay.
What they're doing is, and maybe this is legal, maybe it's not. They're coming up with an NIL package that's basically paying for that scholarship plus a little bit of extra. So they're already doing that, but they're having to do it in this roundabout way. And then, as you know, in your field, then you have to, how do I account for these dollars? Am I properly accounting? Am I properly reporting these dollars? And it just makes a big headache where they may say, why are we bothering with this? Let's just pay it all in NIL or all in scholarships, like you said. But they don't have the flexibility to do that right now. They have to do it one way and then come up with a rigmarole to do it another way.
But I'm saying if it does open up, then you have your Ohio State versus your Ohio. Well, your Ohio State has the ability then, potentially, to use that NIL to either supplement or add on to, not through the back door, but just straight up front. So it kind of gets maybe away from that limitation. I don't know. Again, throw stuff out there. The other thing I just want to say, and I wrote this down from the very beginning, was just this whole idea of where things were at here recently with the college football playoff and what things were coming out of the P2, at least what we were hearing in the media, how much of that was real versus, I don't want to say made up, but kind of they connected some dots that maybe shouldn't have been. But certainly the posturing of the P2, what we see now, that was at least what they got was dramatically more money, more percentage of that revenue. But there were the rumors about more auto qualifiers and more, this is and that, which didn't get put into this. Right. I would say right now it's not the same. Right? Yeah. They are getting more. They've gotten a lot more out of the revenue. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Right. I'm not here to judge that. But I think they're doing right now pretty damn good. Now, you bring up a lot of good points. Yeah. I get it. But I think they're doing pretty good. So I'm not sure what the risk reward is. I'm not sure what I know what the reward is. The risk versus the control over that, the starting over versus the trying to help reform, the posturing versus what they're actually really trying to get. There's just a lot of unknowns right there. And that's why, you always say, we're all about discussions, and I like this topic because there's a lot of things to think about here.
Absolutely. So. And yes, great points. And that's the thing with these is, these are all reasons why they might want to, but each one has a caveat.
Sure.
So, and part of that, okay, let's pull all the value, let's pull all the TV value, let's pull as much money as we can, but then also, like you said, we are also pooling the risk. Yeah. We're putting ourselves and making, instead of having 124 schools spread out the risk, we're having, maybe 50 schools consolidate that risk. And they're the ones that have the money. They have the most to lose anyways. Sure. But yes. So, but that's the thing is all of these things are reasons they may want to. And I think the conventional wisdom is just automatically, yes, they're going to have a breakaway.
Yeah.
But I'll go back to my first topic. What is that going to look like? Are they going to totally leave the NCAA behind and not even be a part of it? Could they leave it in just football? Could you create a football super league?
Right.
Or football and basketball, the two revenue sports, because you could say these sports are revenue positive sports. They're creating revenue. They're creating profits. We're going to separate these and have the other sports be more of like kind of a nonprofit entity for an arm of that school, which could make a lot of sense and could maybe solve a lot of the problems with the lawsuits and things. Or could they possibly split in some ways? We talked about in 2014 they became the autonomous 5.
Right.
Could we see an autonomous 2 where they have even more? They still participate with the NCAA. They still go through eligibility, clearinghouse, all of that, and are attached to the NCAA in some way, but maybe just have their own set of rules that are even more expansive than what the autonomous 5 got. Where they can do some revenue sharing, where they can expand NIL, expand scholarships, do some things on their own. So, and I think there's a lot of different possibilities. So those are all, we talked about the possibilities. We talked about why they may want to. I want to do my prediction for 2030.
Great.
So my prediction, and it's going to be kind of a halfway measure.
Okay.
My prediction kind of falls in line with that last possibility that I said. I think that in some ways they will break away. The revenue sports, they will come up with their own rules. Whether the NCAA agrees with them or they just say, hey, we're taking football and basketball out of your purview and we're going to administer it ourselves. We're not having we're going to create our own rules for these sports because they are revenue. We will keep our other sports under the nonprofit sports basically under your purview, and we will participate as much as we can, but we're going to protect ourselves. I think they're going to want to move to that, basically a version of the autonomous 5, but now a more autonomous 2. That's where I see that we get in 2030. I think it'll be too fast to be their own super league, their own entity, their own mini NFL. I don't think that happens by 2030. And a big reason for that is I think they're going to want to continue to play those other teams.
Right. Yes.
At least by 2030. And we get to 50 years down the road, who knows? I mean, we'll be flying around in space cars, whatever.
Wow.
Yeah, who knows?
I won't be.
Well, okay.
I'll be 6 feet under.
But by 2030, by the end of this decade, I see more autonomy for the Power 2. I see them coming up with their own rules, but still holding in some way to that NCAA standard, if the NCAA still exists, which we said we think they will in some way. That will, maybe you still have the NCAA running the wrestling tournament, the volleyball tournament, the swimming, the track and field, but those Power 2 having some of their own controls where they can spend the money the way they want to spend the money,
Yeah.
but still have their rivalries, still be able to play. If Penn State wants to play Pitt, or Oregon State and Oregon, Washington State and Washington, or other schools that are non-rivals, they want to bring them in, do those home series. I don't think they're going to want to give that up and only be playing each other.
Yeah.
I think they're going to want to stay within that historic framework of college football. So that's my prediction for 2030.
So I want to be clear, because when you started off, I thought you were a little different than where you ended up. So I want to be clear on what you said, because I may completely agree with you, or may slightly agree with you. You said they're going to split off. Did you mean let's just say football? So football only is going to split off from the NCAA, or are you saying they're going to split off as a different type of A2 model, but still within the NCAA?
I think that they will, most likely for football and basketball, they will become even more autonomous than the A5.
Okay.
And not follow the NCAA rules for scholarships, for recruiting, for whether they can pay or pay players or not.
Okay.
But I think that would still allow them, they could still play against Washington could still play a Washington State, and that they will still keep some links and some attachments to the NCAA if they can, especially with their non-revenue sports, but take as much control they have as they can over their own money and what they do with it.
Okay, so I'm going to mostly agree with you. I am going to say that yes, they're going to become more autonomous. I agree with you there. I'm not going to get to the level of detail that you just did in terms of scholarships or what that might be. I think maybe I'm going to say they might be a little more connected to the NCAA in that new autonomous role than what you're saying. So agree, but maybe slightly not to the level that you're saying they're going to get away from that. But I agree. I think because it's going to be a P2, they're going to have an A2. I mean, that's going to follow suit. It may follow after the P2 truly occurs. The A2 may come afterwards. But I agree with you. It will happen. I'm maybe not quite as confident in some of what they would get. I don't want to get into those details, scholarships, whatever.
Right.
But I agree, because I think, especially for 2030, they still see value in being a part of the college football national branding experience, whatever you want to call that. They still want to play some of those schools. They don't want to be pigeonholed into a super league that they only can play each other. And I see that continuing for a while. I put a little bit more stock into that than I think some people do about the super league, and they're just going to go do their own thing. I think, at least for now as commissioners change and presidents change and mindsets change, again, 50 years, whatever that might be, but certainly by 2030, I don't see that happening. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to say, the A2 type of deal, still within the NCAA. I don't know what the A2 is going to be defined as in terms of what they get that others don't. But overall, I think we agree on that.
Yeah, and I'm interested. I hope we get some comments on this of where people think we're going to be. And a reminder, 2030 is only 6 years from now. 6 years ago, it was 2018. We were coming up on COVID and all the things that changed in the sports world and in the world in general. So 6 years is not a long time from now. Yeah. I think a lot of fans, they see what's happening and they think everything is going to move so fast. We talked about this with the Florida State case, where you had fans that really seriously thought Florida State was going to be playing in the Big Ten in 2024.
Yes.
Probably still some now as we live and breathe. Things don't happen that fast. If you look at college, expansion, I've been following this since 1990-ish when Penn State joined the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. It really started long before that. In general, things move at a slower pace, and they have sped up lately, especially the Pac collapsing the way it did. That was a really fast thing. But in general, these things move a little bit slower than that, and they're really based on the TV contracts. The Power 2, they both just signed big long-term TV contracts. Yep. We're signing a college football playoff that's going to take us basically through the end of the decade. The P2 were able to get what they wanted, really. They used that leverage, and they got pretty much what they wanted. So I see a lot of most of the status quo holding until 2030. Now, with all these court cases pending, that's going to be another catalyst. And so I do see the Power 2 wanting as much control over how they spend their money and how that money flows from the program to the players. They're going to want to have some control. So that's why I see them having more autonomy by 2030. But I don't see this whole thing blowing up and having an NFL light, a mini NFL by 2030.
And I'm going to ask you a question. If this is a better question for episode 4, we can hold off until then. But you just brought up the media revenues and that both the P2 just signed relatively recently their media deals for a while now.
Yeah.
And I've seen some comments saying they're not going to add anybody because that's going to mean that the existing schools are going to lose money because they're adding somebody. So a portion of that revenue has to come from everyone else. Now, they can create deals. We saw what the Big Ten did with Oregon and Washington and what SMU's do. I get all of that. But do you think that plays into any of this?
A little bit, yes. However, I think that there are schools, and we know that some of these media deals are secret. They have trade secrets.
Right.
They're not. They release a statement about the deal, but not all the verbiage. I am going to, like you said earlier, you have to be naive to think Clemson and Florida State don't already have some knowledge. And I think you have to be naive if you don't think that the Big Ten, when they re-signed this, they didn't already, talk to their partners, Fox, NBC. Hey, we're thinking about adding these schools. If we do, what kind of deal can we come up with?
Very interesting.
So to me, I would not be surprised at all. And I've heard rumblings and rumors of this. I can't confirm it myself, but I've heard rumblings that basically the Big Ten already has the green light from Fox to go after Florida State, and they'll make it happen. The presidents have said, the presidents and the commissioners have said for both of those, whoever they do add has to be additive. They have to bring value. So just a guess by me, there's some schools that there's already a plan in place, an agreement in place. If you add these schools, we're going to add this amount of money to the contract.
I like it. Makes sense. Makes sense why they wouldn't want those contracts getting out either.
Exactly, yes. Imagine if that hits.
Absolutely.
If Florida State could show, hey, the Big Ten can add $75 million if we join them, that could be huge in their lawsuit.
For sure. Awesome. Well, hey, episode 3 in the books. Really like the discussion. But I'm really looking forward to 4 and 5. I think these will be the most fun that we've done. 4 is going to be focused on the P2, who you think or who we think is actually going to be in the P2 conferences in 2030. And then our last episode, episode 5, will be everybody else, but kind of better defining what the group of whatever that's going to be, 8 or whatever we're going to have, 7, and better defining where we think the group of 8 is going to be there. 7 is going to be there by 2030. So looking forward to those two as well. Anything you want to say before we close this baby out?
Yeah, I think these last 2 episodes have really been good discussion. I hope we get some more comments about this or where people think it's going to be. Here on out, after this, is going to be more of a fun session. Before it was discussion.
Yeah.
Now we're going to just have some fun. You be creative and try and put some conferences together and see what we think they're going to look like going forward. So I'm really looking forward to that episode as well.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you guys for tuning in. Just as a reminder, we do live episodes every Wednesday night, 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. Come on, tune in, say hello. We focused on the Big Ten and the Mountain West. And sometimes the Pac. I know I keep that up to date as well. We're going to stay on all the ACC craziness, all the lawsuits. We've been covering FSU for a while. We jumped on Clemson. So we'll be covering that as well. Very, very busy here on the Big Mountain, but we appreciate you guys for watching. And we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.